Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 6th part of What If Deku Was in Villain Class 1A. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 15, Can We Do This? Where's Bakugo? Kirishima asked unsurely, standing up in front of the other members of Class A when Midoriya walked back in. Mr. Aizawa locked the door behind him and disappeared, perhaps to go and get Kaken himself. Not sure, Midoriya replied. Why? He's gone, isn't he? Jiro interjected, not looking him in the eye. Expelled. Midoriya took off his shoes. Principal Nizu asked me if I wanted him to be, he admitted. But I said no, so, yeah, he's still here. Just not sure where. Wait, seriously? Kirishima blinked in surprise. Wow, thank you, man. I thought he was a goner for sure, Kaminari gaped. You guys were with the principal for ages. Yeah, Midoriya began. Yeah, Principal Nizu said some, interesting things. What about, Ribbit? Tsu questioned. Midoriya walked over and sat down next to her. He made a deal with me. That sounds dangerous. Yurika giggled. What kind of deal? Added Shoto, sitting down on the other side of Midoriya. You're not going to believe it, he laughed, running his hand through his hair, not quite believing it himself. Don't leave us hanging. Mina bounced up and down on her sofa, opposite him. Midoriya cleared his throat and grinned. If we all work together in the sports festival, resulting in any one of us taking first place, and me being on the podium, in like, third or something, this entire class is entered into the provisional hero license exam. This proclamation was met with numerous responses, most adequately described as, "What?" They all cried. Wait, seriously? Yurika stared. That's what I said. Midoriya laughed. And what's more, there are 2 people from other courses that, considering they work with us, upon taking first place instead of us, will also let us take the exam. The support course girls, guessed Shoto. Not quite. Toga, yes, but Mei doesn't count. The other guy is someone who missed the cut for getting into Class B, and weirdly enough, also Class A. This got a few confused looks. His name is Hitachi Shinso. He's in Class 1C and he's got a brainwashing quirk. Okay, well we already have Toga on our side, Ajiro realized. All we need to do is convince the Shinso guy to help us and we're set. There is one problem, Midoriya chose now to explain. If one of us takes first place independently of the rest, so refuses to be in our team or help us at all, then, the deal's off. Ah, said Suro, you mean Bakugo? Yeah, he's not going to be very happy helping you get onto the podium, Hagakure pointed out. I am not asking you all to just back off and let me win if I get to the final, Midoriya made sure they knew. I want to actually deserve to be there, and you guys don't deserve to face a loss like that. But anyway, there's still something I need to know. He looked up at them all, studying their expressions. If we manage to pull this off, he began, then Class A essentially becomes part of the hero course. Well, if one of us fails, the same system applies, but we would start following the hero curriculum, submit hero costumes and names and everything. But I've been trying to convince you all to join me in attempting to get into the hero course for the past few days and, well, you never seem too convinced. They exchanged nervous glances, waiting for someone other than Midoriya to speak their minds for once. It was Yurika who stood in for him. It's just, I don't know about everyone else, but for me, I've always worked against the heroes, and joining them just felt wrong. When you had the vigilante idea, I thought it was really cool. Because we'd be heroes on our terms, not quite on their side. But, the other night you said some things that made sense, about like, getting the licenses and still not caring for their rules. Maybe we won't be heroes on their terms, and we could force them to be on our terms. If that makes any sense. It does, Yaoyorozu nodded. I think your idea is worth following, Midoriya, and we still have almost 2 weeks to prepare. And if you're still not sure, Midoriya continued, standing up and looking directly at Shoto for a moment, then think about it this way. Nizu won't back out this deal, I know he won't. So, just imagine what it would be like if we took the same attitude that we had in that capture the flag game into the sports festival. A few more people started to smile. Midoriya started to pace back and forth. If we acted like the audience expects, like troublemaking villains, and still took the finals for ourselves, it wouldn't just be UA trained this class well, it would be UA has completely failed, this class does what it wants. We'd finally have our own say, the control over our future back. And if they try to stop us, then we just leave, become vigilantes like we were going to do anyway. So, what do you say? The door was thrown open. Mr. Aizawa didn't even show his face. He left them to it, knowing better than to involve himself, and Kiken stormed in. He took one look at the class, gathered around Midoriya, and sneered, about to march up the stairs to his room. Kiken, wait, Midoriya called after him. He actually stopped. I told Principal Nizu not to expel you. You want me to be freaking thankful, he snapped, whirling around and baring his teeth at him. No, Midoriya replied, maybe a little. He rolled his eyes and started to walk away. Hey, wait. Midoriya exclaimed, running over to him whilst the rest of the class watched. I'm sorry for purposely winding you up during capture the flag. Purposely. Hear him out, man. Kirishima interjected, trust me on this one. Kiken growled but made no attempt to leave. The principal made a deal with us, Midoriya explained. If one of us gets first place in the sports festival, and I make it onto at least the bottom of the podium, then Class A becomes a hero class. Kiken narrowed his eyes at him. But the thing is, we have to work together, he continued. If one of us makes first place independently of the rest, not helping each other at all in the first few rounds, then the deal is void. And you're freaking scared I'll take first place without your help, he leered. Well, you're right. There is a chance you could make first without our help, Midoriya contradicted. Face the facts, if you work against us, there's less of a chance of you making first, and less of a chance that we make the hero course. And there's also more of a chance that I'll go back to Principal Nizu and say that I've changed my mind about having you expelled, he said with a grin, crossing his arms and raising his chin defiantly. Kiken gave him a toothy grin, alright, you freaking nerd. You lot need all the help you can get, so I'll do it. But let me warn you now. Once we're in the finals, you're on your own. If you get matched up with me in the first round, you're dead, clear. Crystal, Midoriya replied without hesitation. Kiken actually let out a slight laugh as he walked off, shaking his head in disbelief. Midoriya smiled, he could do this. The next few weeks were action-packed. Mr. Aizawa must have realized they were up to something because he allowed all of their PE lessons to follow the same method that they'd started before the infamous Capture the Flag event. Midoriya practiced sword fighting with Yaoyorozu most of the time, occasionally taking a break so the two could listen in on the martial arts training that Mr. Aizawa had now taken over. They even did parkour once or twice. Nearly all of Midoriya's detentions were now held at the support course, to the extent where they didn't really feel like detentions anymore. He told Toga and Mei what he was up to, and they were eager to help, on the condition that they allowed both of them to reach the tournament round, something that Midoriya only accepted once they promised that they only wanted to use their first rounds to advertise their gadgets, and if they were pitched against each other, they said they'd make sure it was Toga who proceeded, and not Mei, and they'd also ensure that any Class B students who slipped through the cracks would suffer at their hands. Yes, they were just a little scary. With the exception to the support items rule in the sports festival, something that he double-checked with through Principal Nizu, he just texted the monitored group chat addressing Nizu, and he replied with a satisfying yes. Midoriya was also busy making items for his classmates. Toga and Mei were more than willing to let the class utilize some of their inventions, since it gave them more advertising opportunities. Once Yaoyorozu revealed the logistics of her quirk to them, they suddenly had even more possibilities to create weird and wonderful inventions, tailored for anyone who needed them. In the remaining detentions that Midoriya had with Class B, he made sure to gain as much information as possible on their opponents. He jotted down weaknesses, strengths, and even minor inconveniences that they complained about loudly in his presence. In his notebooks, Midoriya prepared plans on combating any of the hero course students. If he had to face any of them in the finals alone, he needed every advantage he could get. Speaking of which, he did the same for Class A, but he'd been thinking up plans to defeat Kikin in combat since forever, so he didn't need to put much thought into that. Most of the plans had a low success rate, but oh well. That didn't mean he wasn't worried about the finals. A lot was riding on his ability to make the last few rounds of the tournament, without any quirk to help him out. That was when he remembered that he was a villain. And villains don't always play by the rules. Anyway, he'd found the official rulebook in the library during a supervised study session. There was no spoken nor written rule saying he wasn't allowed to hack into their system and rig the tournament round. Those 2 weeks passed them by in the blink of an eye, and soon enough, Class A was standing in their designated waiting room, just outside the jam-packed arena. "I'm so nervous." Mina squealed. "Ah. What do you think the first round will be like?" "We'll just have to wait and see, I guess," Jiro sighed, although she was clearly rather anxious too. Midoriya tugged at his PE kit. The top was short-sleeved, just reaching his elbows, where the red band of Class A stood out brightly on the last few inches of fabric. Just above it, was the gold, Class President mark. Itza had the same, only silver for vice. But Midoriya wasn't just wearing the plain kit. Like many of his classmates, small adjustments and trinkets had been added. He had a sheath for his sword, strapped across his back rather than at his hip so it wouldn't get in the way. It crossed over the large number 18 of his jacket, like he was disowning the name. Toga seemed to be quite a fashionable influence on Mei's designs, and so the sheath and straps had been colored red with a gold outline, the buckle connecting the two across his chest, also colored gold. He also had a black utility belt, containing numerous little inventions that he didn't tell his classmates about. Most people refused to take any support items, including Kikin, Itza, Shoto, Tokoyami, and quite a few more. Maybe they wanted to prove that they didn't need the additions to do well, or maybe they just couldn't be bothered. Others accepted a few minor things. Eureka had a bracelet that apparently helped with her nausea, as well as a retractable grappling hook on the other wrist. Mina had some specialized shoes that allowed her to somehow defy physics and skate on weak acid. She also decided not to wear gloves, and for the first time, was wearing a normal PE kit, rather than the one specially designed for her so as little acid as possible could be released. Sato had a little pouch of sugar cubes for quirk activation, Aoyama had an upgraded, and shinier, version of his belt for more efficient aim with his laser. Jiro had a set of noise-canceling headphones that currently hung around her neck. But Midoriya's favorite support item was Commonaries, a set of adhesive discs that he could stick onto targets. They would direct his electricity towards them, so he now only electrocuted what he wanted, rather than absolutely everything in his vicinity. "How are you feeling, Shoto?" Midoriya asked him quietly, sitting down beside him in the corner of the room. He had been watching everyone else blankly, just listening and waiting for the events to begin. He didn't reply immediately. "My father's here. He said he would be." Midoriya bit his lip. "Don't worry about him. He can't touch you here, you're Yue's responsibility, not his. You know that out of everyone, they're going to be watching me the closest," Shoto reminded him, running his hand through his hair to make sure it spiked up in the way he liked. "I know," Midoriya nodded. "So, look like you're having fun." Shoto raised his eyebrows and Midoriya grinned. "It doesn't have to be you who wins. You only have to do that if you want to. I promise you, by the end of this, the attention will be spread across the rest of Class A. You're on our team, remember. You're not facing this alone, and you're facing it for no one but yourself. Your dad has nothing to do with it, nor Dabi." He gave him a soft smile and nodded. It wasn't long before a speaker announced that it was time for them to make their way to the entrance to the arena. With various levels of enthusiasm, but a common buzz of excitement, Class 1A followed the signs and waited just out of sight. Midoriya and Itza, being the representative and his vice, had to stand at the front, but Shoto, Yaoyorozu, and Eureka were right behind them. The latter was bouncing up and down and muttering excitably to Tsu. Yaoyorozu was clearly deep in thought, her eyes closed and mouth moving, with no words coming out, likely quizzing herself over how to make different objects and weapons. Shoto stood perfectly still, seemingly unbothered, but the slight chill in the air gave him away. "Hello and welcome to UA's first-year sports festival," boomed present mic to a cheering crowd. He introduced himself and Mr. Izawa, to Class A's shock and delight, as he hyped up the audience for the action-packed day ahead of them. And without further ado, let's meet our competitors, taking the stage for the first time. Heading up in reverse order, we have the brilliant minds of the business course in Class 1A. This was met by a half-hearted cheer when the first class made their way out into the open. Did you know that every class other than the hero course can take support items into the arena? There was no mystery as to why Present Mike made sure to mention this. Always the wild cards of the game, give it up for the support course, Class 1D. I wonder if anyone will recognize Toga from last year's Class A. Tsu pondered. Not sure, Midoriya replied over his shoulder. I don't think she got that far in. Will there be any hidden gems in our next class? It's General Studies, Class 1C. Shinso. Midoriya had never spoken to him. They met eyes when they passed each other in the corridor, on the way to lunch more than once. But Midoriya didn't know how to go about talking to him. Oh, just to let you know, you're in serious danger of being put into my class, which has a really bad reputation, even compared to previous Class 1As, which could potentially ruin your entire life. So, anyway, how was your day? This was why he decided to leave it until the last moment, at the sports festival. He gritted his teeth, this better work. And the stars of the show, the survivors of the infamous attack of the League of Villains, give it up for 20 of the most promising hero students in the country, it's UA's Class 1B. The roar that met Class B's arrival was almost deafening. Jiro even pulled her headphones over her ears in discomfort. Oh, here we go, Eureka groaned nervously. Finally, it's my least favorite English class. He's going to be so biased, isn't he? Midoriya realized. Maybe we shouldn't have been so hard on him, murmured Yayorozu, who never really had anything to do with the increasingly harsh pranks on Present Mike. No regrets. Mina contradicted as Midoriya phased back into whatever Present Mike was saying about them all. And to stop them from reaching a villainous future. But let's see how they match up to the rest of their year. It's Class 1A. As they walked out into the arena, they were met with a vastly different welcome. A tradition taught for years and years of sports festivals, and Class A has always been the side the audience was against. They were met with their echoing boos and hissing, the audience playing the game and enjoying themselves, not truly understanding the effect it would have on the recipients. Midoriya had known what was coming, but that didn't stop the feeling of him being crushed under the pressure as thousands of eyes were rested upon him, the gold-banded president of the villain class. Oh, boo yourself. Hagakure suddenly cried. Yeah, boo. Mina shouted, pointing both of her thumbs down at the audience. A few others followed their lead by hollering back at the crowd. Their actions made Midoriya feel the slightest bit more comfortable. I bet no one can take out that stupid camera drone, yelled Siro, which resulted in Mina swinging her arm and sending a sloppy projectile of acid at the nearby camera. She hit it on the first try, resulting in it falling out of the sky immediately and crashing to the side of their group. The class cheered and clapped, laughing and suddenly forgetting about the exposure. How much money do I get? Mina exclaimed, jumping up and down at her success. I never said I'd give you any money. Midoriya hung back to walk next to Shoto. Hey, I think we're being watched, he said, pointing up at the massive screens around the top of the immense arena. Another, surviving camera drone panned around them, and as expected, Shoto was picked out of the group. Now he and Midoriya were on view for all to see whilst they walked to the center of the pitch. Give them a wave, Midoriya grinned, doing just that. Not my style, Shoto deadpanned, and gave the camera his middle finger. It immediately switched away, pretending they hadn't just broadcasted the rude gesture, whilst Class A howled with laughter. They were still stifling giggles by the time Miss Midnight called first place in the Hero Course entrance exams, Ibara Shiozaki, with the vine hair quirk, up to make some kind of speech. About a minute into a beautifully rehearsed speech about strengths, willfulness, and some overly religious symbolism, Midoriya found himself yawning. Oh, my god, just finish already. Hagakure actually had the guts to shout up at her, an act which made most of Class A gape and laugh. Please, everyone, have some respect, Itza whispered back at them. How much trouble would I be in if I just taped away the microphone? Siro grinned. A lot, look at Miss Midnight. Mina giggled, whilst their substitute teacher gave them the evilest glare that she could muster from the corner of the stage Shiozaki was on. Midoriya never said no, this means I'm allowed, right? Asked Siro, obviously joking. I thought I wasn't allowed to stop you from doing stupid things anymore. Midoriya grinned back at him. You said that was Itza's job. "Oh yeah," Eureka sniggered, "you lead us into trouble, and Itza leads us out." "Would you lot shut up," hissed Suburba from Class B, standing a few meters away from them. "Only if she does," said Jiro, rolling her eyes. She did, eventually, making sure to turn her nose up at Class A after she bowed to the audience and walked down the stairs back to her class. "We're barely 5 minutes in and everyone already hates us," Kirishima realized. "Well, it's about to get a lot worse," Midoriya grinned, watching Miss Midnight walk back to the center of the stage, her smile fixed as she prepared to announce the first event of the games. An obstacle course. Midoriya's smile grew wider, and he wondered if Nizu had done this on purpose. This was the perfect opportunity for Class A to work together and defeat a common enemy, that being, nearly everyone else. The competitors were gathered before a starting line whilst the finishing touches were set up, such as the cameras being prepared and the obstacles being quickly checked over, any mechanics being activated. Midoriya glanced around. He spotted Toga and Mei, who both grinned and gave him a thumbs up. Yeah, they'd be fine on their own. He turned to the rest of the class in the time they had left. "Okay, so the first event is going to be focusing on cutting down the numbers. What UA wants is to see all of Class B getting through, and then probably most of Class A, as well as any other promising students from the other classes. That means there will be about, 40. 45, around that many spaces available for the second round. Remember that we need Toga, Mei, and Shinso to make it through, but we can't guarantee that there will be enough spaces for them all," Midoriya muttered. I think we'll be alright," Tsu interjected. 20 from Class B, 19 from Class A, and 3 from other classes, that makes 42. It seems like a good number. Right, Midoriya nodded. But anyway, our best bet is to ensure that Class B is held back as much as possible, which means we all have to work together the best we can. Here, Yaoyorozu suddenly perked up. She dropped a small earpiece in Midoriya's hand and started to pass the same to everyone else. "Radio communications. I practiced making them for our escape plan, but it was too much of a risk to use them in the end," she explained. "Press the button to speak, make sure to be quite loud, but let's let Midoriya take the lead." He grinned, thanked her, and put the earpiece snugly into his right ear. "Okay, we need to pass each obstacle as quickly as possible, and then try to make it difficult to get through behind us." "But what about that Shinso guy?" frowned Kaminari. Midoriya hesitated, and then looked to his left. Only to find Shinso staring right back at him. Midoriya cracked a grin. "Let's consider this his entrance exam to Class 1A, shall we? Everyone get into your positions," Midnight proclaimed. "The event is about to begin." Turning around, Midoriya saw a huge door swing open behind a red archway, the beginning to the obstacle course. "Let's move to the front," Itza decided, about to do just that. Midoriya grabbed his arm. "No, wait," he studied the archway, frowning at it. "The door's too small, look how narrow it is. Everyone will charge at it immediately, and it'll be jam-packed, just like the corridors were when the press attack happened. We hung back then and had a clearer view of what was going on. Our best bet is to do the same now." The countdown began. "But what if we can't make it through?" Eureka exclaimed nervously. "Just trust me. 2, 1. And begin," yelled Present Mike. Just as Midoriya had predicted, within seconds, the door to the obstacle course was completely impassable. From the looks of it, no one had made it through the other side yet, they'd all ran at it at the same time, from too many different angles. "Come on!" Midoriya yelled, ushering his class forwards. "Shoto, freeze everyone in the doorway in place." He did so immediately, slamming his foot down and letting the ice creep ahead of them, making the floor an ice rink. "Make a slope up behind the people, everyone, do your best to climb over their heads." Midoriya barked, running up the icy steps. Before he knew it, Eureka had grabbed his hand. The two floated over the crowd, and were the first across, Eureka's grappling hook yanking them to safety just before the likes of Bakugo, blasting himself through the air, Yaoyorozu, using metal rods protruding from her hand to pole vault over the crowd, Siro, who swung like Tarzan overhead, holding onto Kaminari and Mina who screamed their heads off in the process. Laughing and falling over each other, all of classes somehow made it through, but they knew they wouldn't have long. "Shoto, freeze the ground behind us. Keep the ice rink going." Midoriya exclaimed whilst they charged ahead. Shoto lagged behind, grinning as he turned the obstacle course into some kind of winter wonderland. Looks like Class A is going out of their way to make this as difficult as possible for everyone else. Present Mick's voice boomed through the speakers either side of the course. Damn right, we are, laughed Zero. I bet I can reach the end before you do, soy sauce. Mina yelled at Zero. I like soy sauce, okay, he shouted back as she overtook him. It's not funny. When Shoto finally stopped the ice, Midoriya glanced back over his shoulder. He knew the hero course couldn't have been far behind. This was the moment when. Bye, Izuku, yelled a girl with twin blonde buns and a manic, fanged grin. Toga, he exclaimed, as she and Mei whizzed past Class A on identical sets of rocket-powered roller skates. Hey. Those were my idea. The two just laughed, weaving past the others with surprising skill, whilst Present Mike excitably announced that Class A had been overtaken. They're the exceptions, right? Jiro questioned as they continued to run around the corner. Midoriya had barely replied with a yes. Before there was a loud scream, crash, and bang. They reached the end of the corner they were on, and the entire group stopped to gawk at what UA had cooked up for them to face now. It's the second obstacle. Present Mike yelled, let's see how they match up to the hero course's training robots. What is this, some kind of advertisement for how much money the school has? Kaminari yelled. The hero course is going to have a serious advantage here, Tsu realized whilst Mei and Toga zipped around the numerous robots, struggling to find a way through the blockade. Then we can't give them the chance. Kirishima cried, charging forwards at the closest, smaller robot. The others followed his lead, beginning to cut through the mechanical maniacs. Ever aware that Shoto's ice wouldn't hold for long, Midoriya gritted his teeth, drew his sword and followed Class A into the siege. He pressed the button on his earpiece, everyone. Try not to take out too many robots, we need them to hold Class B back. Head for the center giant one, with the 0 written on the side. I freaking got it, replied the slightly static voice of Kiken. No, wait. Midoriya tried to retort. He couldn't say any more than that, though, because he soon became preoccupied. A robot leapt at him from the right. Without hesitation, Midoriya swung his sword and cut off its arm, before slicing again to take off the head. He noted a piece of metal plating that was tossed aside in the action, thinking it would work well as a shield. He picked it up and used the hanging wires to grip onto it tightly. Whilst taking out a second attacking robot, Midoriya saw a flash of light, followed by Kiken flying through the air before the towering robot he'd pointed out moments before. Taking off the head of another metallic opponent, Midoriya spoke into his earpiece again. Okay. Kiken will go behind that center robot and knock it off balance, so it falls towards us. Whilst it's distracted, everyone else, go through its legs and to the other side. Shoto, freeze it off balance. Once we're through, someone needs to give it one last hit, so it falls over and blocks the path for everyone else. He got few replies via the earpiece, but that was to be expected. Hopefully, they'd all heard him. They'd all been separated to fight different robots, but they didn't have this time to waste. Glancing over his shoulder, Midoriya could see other groups catching up on them. Few hesitated at the sight of the robots due to the announcement Present Mike had made earlier. Midoriya was momentarily distracted from his own fight when, following a loud bang, Shoto merely flicked his wrist to freeze colossal robot in its place, slightly tilted off its center of gravity. Class B must have been working together too, because a large amount of them arrived at once, alongside some other random competitors who had clearly been swept up in the moving crowd. Midoriya stopped himself from scanning for Shinso's purple head of hair and pressed forwards. Come on, Midori. Yurika called out, waving at him as he dodged another attacking robot and hurried under the giant's legs beside her and Tsu. After quickly checking that everyone was there, yes, including Hagakure, Midoriya pointed up at the frozen robot. Okay, enough force and high enough should take it out. And quickly, before the others get too close. It's mine. Kiken insisted, but he never got the chance. Not even a second later, there was an explosion unlike anything that Kiken could conjure, when Yayorozu set off a cannon, the projectile hitting the robot on the back of its head and sending it and shards of hail like ice crashing down before the hero students. Everyone just stared at her whilst she grinned smugly at her work, the great boom of the falling robot sending an icy gust of wind through her hair, jacket undone and hands on her hips. It had to be illegal for someone to be that cool. That was excessive, but awesome. Eureka cried, punching the air. Let's keep moving, Shoto insisted. Midoriya noted the build-up of frost on his right side and his slight shiver. He knew he couldn't rely on Shoto's powerful quirk for the rest of the obstacle race. With a nod, Midoriya gestured them all to move forwards whilst Present Mike yelled about the repercussions of the new obstacle the rest of the competitors faced. What's with the medal? Asked Sue as she hopped alongside Midoriya. Shield, he answered simply. What the rest of his class didn't know, was that he already had a shield, but not on him. One of the support girl's favorite inventions had been a retractable shield, hidden inside an arm brace that Midoriya was saving for the tournament rounds. He didn't want to risk giving it away early or damaging it, since he'd have to be fighting the people who were currently his teammates soon enough. Whoa, yelled Kaminari, bringing the entire group to a halt. Midoriya, almost out of breath, stopped before the next obstacle, a chasm. Present Mike was screaming something dramatic but Midoriya wasn't listening. They had to get to the other side, but the only paths provided were numerous thin but sturdy wires that linked the beginning to pillars rising up from the seemingly bottomless pit. The most direct route was clear. If Class A could take the center path, and then make it impassable for any who tried to follow them, Class B would lose a significant amount of time, having to follow the longer options. Okay, here's what we're going to do, he began. A few people will go over first and wait in the... You're taking too long, barked Kaken, who took off with another bang, soaring through the air and landing at the next pillar with ease. Midoriya scowled at him from a distance. He continued to speak into the earpiece. Wait at the first pillar. We'll be cutting off the most direct route across after we take it ourselves. Everyone but me and... Eureka, get to Kaken as quickly as you can. They didn't hesitate, already using their powers to speed across. Itza balanced expertly on the wire and used the engines in his legs to propel himself over. Tsu's natural frog-like abilities made climbing over just behind him an easy feat. Others needed a little more help. Whilst Midoriya watched the path behind them nervously, Yaoyorozu used a zip wire to take less competent people in this situation such as Aoyama, Kota, and Mina, across one by one. Okay, when you're all over, cut every line you can reach except from the center too. Then move on to the next pillar and do the same thing. Eureka and I will be right behind you. Kaken needs to stay with the group to fight off anyone who manages to pass the two of us. Kaken was quick to retort, ha. They're going to get past you idiots easily. Yeah, well if you listen to me, we wouldn't be in this situation, he snapped. Kaken didn't reply. From Present Mix commentary, Midoriya knew vaguely what was happening to the hero course behind them. The blockade they'd worsened was clearly proving to be a challenge, but some had started to slip through. Despite this, he and Eureka managed to pass to the first pillar without any problems. He dropped his makeshift shield by his feet and drew his sword, swinging it above his head the second that the first competitor to get through, skidded to the edge of the chasm. Sword still held in the air, Midoriya stopped. It was Shinso. He must have slipped past whilst the hero course focused on battling the robots, helping each other out. Come on, we need to go. Eureka insisted, but Midoriya wasn't going to let this opportunity slide. Shinso gritted his teeth and glanced around. He spied the next intact wire, away from Midoriya, and realized it wouldn't get him across nearly as quickly as these ones would. Despite that, he started to run towards it. Midoriya dropped his sword, cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Hey, wait." Shinso hesitated. Midoriya turned on his earpiece, "Yaoyorozu, can you attach that zipline contraption to the wire and send it back to me?" "I can try," she replied without question, leaning down to do just that and sending it back across with as much force as she could muster. "What are you doing?" called out Jiro. Toga and Mei had just gotten through, showing that Class B could be there any second. Not at all fazed by the lack of wires, the girls used upgraded versions of Eureka's grappling hook to get across. Midoriya only just managed to reach Yaoyorozu's zipline. He took it off the wire, hurried to the other side of the pillar, and sent it back to Shinso. He seemed more than a little confused but was clearly smart enough to realize this was not an opportunity to miss out on. As soon as he had a hold of it, Shinso didn't hesitate to throw himself off the edge of the cliff, push forwards and was down the line, taking Midoriya's hand when he reached their pillar. "Stand back," Midoriya insisted as he picked up his sword again, swung it as hard as he could, and cut off one line after the other. "Why did you help me?" Shinso questioned immediately. Yurika was quicker to answer than Midoriya, "Because you looked like." And then Midoriya remembered. Name, Hitachi Shinso. Quirk, brainwashing. Gains complete control over a person's actions if they answer any question from him. "Stop your friend from getting any further," Shinso ordered. Yurika, her eyes glazed over, quickly turned around, and with all the skills of the villain she was, leapt forwards to pin Midoriya to the ground. Luckily, his shield was just within reach, and he barely managed to block her attack. "Stop her now or my class cuts the lines on the other side," Midoriya ordered, dodging and evading a brainwashed Yurika. His hand was on his earpiece, so everyone on the other side could hear his threat. Shinso hesitated before the wire that he was now attaching the zipline apparatus to. The first line went slack when Sato ripped it from the wall, leaving only one option behind. Whether or not they'd actually do it didn't matter, they didn't have this time to wait around, and Class A was not a group to take risks with. With a scowl, he told Yurika to wait, without releasing her from his hold. She took a step back from Midoriya, still staring blankly forwards, mouth slightly agape. Midoriya continued to hold his sword and shield up, ready to defend himself at a moment's notice. "Tell me," Shinso hissed. "Why has the president of Class 1A been staring at me and following me around for the past week?" Midoriya didn't reply. Shinso grinned, "I'm not going to brainwash you. I haven't been following you." "Right," the smile faded from his face, "what do you want?" "I want to help you." "Me? What would the likes of you want from someone like me?" Midoriya knew he didn't have time for this, and he could see some of Class B arriving at the chasm's edge from the corner of his eye. In the other, he spied Class A starting to make their way to the end of this obstacle, knowing full well that would be what Midoriya wanted. "I know about you," Midoriya began, choosing his words carefully. "I know you don't get along with Class C, I know they're scared of you, I know you're a lot like me." "I'm not a villain," he hissed. "Neither am I." Shinso scoffed like he didn't believe him for a second. "Look, I get it. People judge me because of the nature of my quirk, they jump to conclusions, and honestly, with the way they treat me, they're the villains. Does that sound familiar?" The general studies student hesitated for a moment, the aggression fading from his face and demeanor relaxing a little. "What's your quirk then?" Midoriya had guessed this might be coming. He was planning on avoiding the question, but then he saw Setsuna catching up to Monoma and the others struggling to find a quick way to Midoriya, and he knew he was in trouble. "I'm quirkless, okay." Shinso looked surprised. "Wait, you are completely quirkless, no special ability at all, yet I'm the representative of the most infamous class in all of Japan." "I know, it confused me too. But the fact is, I had to work hard my entire life to get anywhere close to where I wanted to go, and that didn't work out too well, because look at where I am now. This sports festival is my only shot to prove that I'm more than a quirkless loser, okay? I'm not a villain, and neither are a lot of my classmates. All of them deserve a chance, and that's why we're here. So, do you want in on that chance or not? Because we're just about out of time." Shinso, wide-eyed and seemingly nervous, glanced between Midoriya, Yurika, Class A behind him and Class B in front. He gritted his teeth and clicked his fingers. Yurika blinked. "Huh? What just happened?" "All right, fine." Shinso exclaimed, "Tell your classmates not to cut the line." Midoriya raised his hand to his ear. The only one that remained on the next pillar was Yaoyorozu. Everyone else was almost all the way across. "Yaoyorozu, go, we'll meet you on the other side." She seemed unsure, but nodded, tucking the knife that she had ready to cut the other wire into her boot, and turning to run after the others. "Shinso, throw the zip line over the edge," he ordered. "What? Class B will get it? Do it now." "You're crazy," he yelled, tossing the zip wire apparatus as far as he could into the pit. "Yurika, make us all float. We need to get moving." Midoriya insisted, and she did just that. Yurika reached towards the one remaining line and started to pull herself over, propelling herself through the air. Shinso copied her, and Midoriya was just behind him, painfully aware of their approaching enemies. The second that Yurika released her quirk, trying not to gag, on the final pillar, Midoriya turned to see Monoma and Setsuna on the column behind them, piecing themselves together with identical splitting quirks. They must have split themselves up into pieces, floated each part over, and then reassembled on the other side. Knowing it was futile, Midoriya cut the line to their pillar too. He spoke into his earpiece, "Okay, who wants to get back over here and hold the hero course back?" He knew exactly who'd answer the call for a fight and 0 words were needed. In seconds, Kaken rocketed back over to their pillar, yelling about how useless and slow Midoriya was, as he gave the 2 hero students a face full of fire. "Go, go, go!" Midoriya exclaimed, and Shinso and Yurika leapt forwards to crawl over the longest section of wire yet, all the way to the other side. It was the only one that remained connected to that specific pillar, since Class A had been cutting as many sections of wire as they could in the wait. But they were only halfway before Kaken slipped up. "No stolen quirks to help you this time, 18, yelled Monoma, soaring through the air and piecing himself back together in seconds. He turned off Setsuna's quirk to activate something else, but Midoriya wasn't going to wait around to find out. "Yurika, deactivate your quirk." "What?" she yelled, but did it anyway, she and Shinso gripping tightly onto the wire. Hanging upside down, holding onto the wire with his legs, one hand holding the line and his makeshift shield, the other swinging his sword. It sliced through the wire just before Monoma could touch him, and with simultaneous screams, Midoriya, Shinso and Yurika could only hold on for dear life as the cut line started to swing towards the cliff at an alarming rate. "Quirk, quirk, quirk!" Midoriya yelled at Yurika, struggling to hold on. She slid down the wire, tapped the top of his head and then brushed her fingertips across Shinso's shoe. Their descent slowed as all gravity was nullified. All too terrified to speak, Yurika hooked her arms through each of the boys, and activated her grappling hook to haul them all up to safety. "That was nuts," yelled Mina as she reached out to take Yurika's hand. The 3 of them collapsed on the other side with collective sighs of relief. Midoriya, breathing heavily, looked up to see Monoma clambering back up to the last pillar, clearly having used Setsuna's quirk to climb back up, but with some struggle. In seconds, Kaken flew back over to them. "The Vine Girl's here," he warned, "they'll be over in freaking no time, let's move." Shinso held out a hand to Midoriya. He grinned and took it. Shoving his sword back into his sheath and shouldering the shield, Midoriya raced after the rest of Class A, Shinso right beside him. They ran up a set of stone stairs, turned a corner, and then... But will Class A be able to defeat the final obstacle? "That's right. It's a minefield," yelled Present Mike. "You've got to be kidding me," groaned Jiro. Toga and Mei were the only ones there but had clearly not gotten far. Midoriya knew that they didn't have their set of hover boots with them on the first round, and their roller skates were definitely out of fuel. Still, they were clearly having fun, struggling to weave around the not at all discreetly buried mines, whilst still on wheels. Toga screamed when she rolled backwards into another one, which blew up in her face with a cloud of pink dust. Mei laughed at her, and promptly did the same. "Okay," Midoriya sighed, utterly exhausted at this point, "well, let's all just try and get through this as quickly as possible. We'll definitely all get places in the next round at this point. For now, whoever gets to the end the quickest gets first place, how's that? Bet you 1 yen I can get to the end before you." Mina yelled at whoever would listen. "Give me that singular yen." Hagakure laughed, hot in pursuit as they started to hopscotch around the mines that the support course girls hadn't already blown up. "See you in the next round then," Shinso grinned at Midoriya. Midoriya smiled back, knowing that he'd done the right thing. He nodded, and Shinso ran on ahead. "Midoriya," said Shoto when he noticed him lagging behind. "Go on," Midoriya gestured ahead, "just catching my breath, I'm in no rush. Beat Kaken for me." Shoto smiled and nodded, turning to attempt just that. Midoriya sighed. He couldn't see or hear Class B yet, but he knew they wouldn't be far. Turning back to the minefield, he decided he better just face it sooner rather than later. He was about to toss his shield aside since this was the last obstacle and it served no further use. This was when he had an idea. People had been more careful at the beginning of the minefield, even Mei and Toga, hence there being far more mines there. Using the edge of his shield, Midoriya started to dig these up quickly and carefully, pushing them into a mound. Shoto and Kaken were close to the end now, as were Toga and Mei, who had stopped racing really and were just messing around at this point. Midoriya braced himself, wrapping the loose wires attached to the slab of metal around his hands securely. With one last look behind him, at the sight of Minoma, Shiozaki, Setsuna, and a few others finally coming into view, Midoriya grinned and threw himself onto the pile of bombs. "Who's the slow one now?" Midoriya yelled as he pretty much landed on Kiken's back, slammed his shield onto a nearby mine, and propelled himself even further forwards, leaving both him and Shoto quite literally in his dust. He had to do some kind of flip that he'd never attempted before upon landing, so that the sword tied to his back wouldn't cause any problems. It was a miracle that he ended up on his feet. Barely 10 seconds later, Midoriya charged back into the stadium to a less than appreciative welcome. In first place, Shoto was second, a fuming Kiken came third. Midoriya didn't pay too much attention after that. "That was amazing, Midoriya," croaking Tsu as she hopped over to him. "Thanks," he sighed, still trying to catch his breath. "My whole life flashed before my eyes, it really sucked." Shinso arrived not long after a very scorched Toga and Mei hobbled in. He gave him a swift nod as he separated from the group of Class A students that he arrived with to lean against the wall and stay mostly out of sight. Present Mike seemed to be trying to pretend that this hadn't happened, and was heavily focused on Class B, back in the minefield, who were battling each other now in the same spirit that Class A had decided upon, might as well fight for higher finishing positions at the end. Midoriya joined the rest of Class A as they cheered the last of their group on. Poor, unfit Aoyama had been on the wrong side of more than one unstable mine, and despite the huge head start for the last obstacle, the first of the hero students, Shiozaki, and behind her, Honmuki, had just whirled around the corner in the tunnel that led into the arena, and were gaining on the last member of Class A. They yelled supportive words at him, grinning ear to ear as he reached the end and fell face first over the finishing line, moments before Class B. They all cheered loudly, ignoring the audience's greater enthusiasm for Shiozaki's relative success. Sato hoisted an exhausted Aoyama up onto one of his shoulders as they all chanted his name. And Aoyama was loving it. For just a moment, Midoriya forgot about it all. He forgot about why he was here, what he needed to do, what he had just done. He forgot about how the audience was staring, frowning, some even booing still. Right now, all that mattered was this small victory. Right now, it felt like, whatever they had to face next, they really could do it. Chapter 16, What is in our way? A cavalry battle, okay, Midoriya muttered to himself, brain whirring as he tried to get his head around their next event. The UA Sports Festival was always a hive of activity. With 3 years of classes to get through, the event was spread over 3 days. Since the first years duked it out on day 1, all the hype had been leading up to this, and the school did their best to spread the event out. Round 1 was over, and Midoriya was relieved to see that it was indeed 42 competitors that made it through to the second event. That meant they had all of Class A, all of Class B, Mei and Toga from Class D, and Shinso from Class C. Everyone else was out of the competition, which they probably didn't care much about. The exhausted students were then given a break whilst the organizers set up for Event 2, and meanwhile leaked as much money from the audience as humanly possible, through stands, snacks, souvenirs and various other goods. Midoriya could barely focus on the food during their lunch break. Whilst Eureka spoke animatedly with Toga and Mei, Shoto sat beside Midoriya in supportive silence. Now, they were back in the thick of it, given 5 minutes to separate into teams of between 2 and 5, which would assemble to support one member, their team leader, on the top, with everyone else holding them up from underneath. They would wear headbands with various points on them. The higher up the ranks they got in the obstacle race, the more points the individual would be worth, and therefore the more valuable the headband. All they had to do was steal headbands from other teams, and the ones with the most points at the end would advance to the finals, simple enough. Only. And the points for first place, Midnight grinned, is 10 million. Everyone fell silent. And Midoriya burst into laughter. He was going to be worth 10 million points. If the universe didn't hate him enough already. Midnight clearly didn't expect this to be their reaction since all of Class A was now laughing with Midoriya about his misfortune. Clearing her throat, she announced that they now had some time to choose their teams and plan a strategy. She wished them luck in a way that seemed as though she was only addressing the hero course, and a large timer was displayed on the screens around the arena. Midoriya wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. Okay, we've got to come up with a plan here. Toga and Mei wandered over, waving at Eureka excitably, who they seemed to get on with really well. Shinso wasn't far behind them. He tapped Midoriya on the shoulder. I'm either going to brainwash people to be on my team or somehow convince them with people skills that I don't have, he admitted. And from the reaction you just had to the 10 million thing, I can't help but think that you have a plan. Midoriya faltered, we'll see about that. Okay, so, here's what's going to happen. He turned around and addressed the entire group, painfully aware that, not far away, Class B was also gathering. Class B is going to distribute their power across groups, and one of those groups is going to be very heavy in terms of defense. An attack group will strike first to take the 10 million point headband from me and give it to that defense group. The rest of the Class B teams will then focus on removing all our headbands whilst we're focusing on the large points and put us out of commission by air, gluing us to the ground or surrounding us with quicksand, stopping us from moving. Only once we're unable to attack, will they turn the tables in the last few minutes and jostle between them all for the 16 available spots in the final, so 4 of them will miss out. They all stared at him. He grinned and clapped his hands together, and we are going to do almost exactly the same thing. Mina raised her hand. What do you mean by almost? We need to prioritize certain teams so that they definitely get through to the final, Midoriya sighed. Sorry, but because of the deal with Nizu, I have to progress through. That's why Shinso's going to be on my team. He blinked at him. I am. Yes, and the second team that definitely has to progress is Mei's and Toga's, since that was part of our deal with them. They grinned and high-fived. Look, can I give you all my idea and then you can tell me if I should change it? Midoriya asked nervously. I thought that was what we always did. Aitsu frowned at him. Midoriya ran a hand through his hair. Oh, okay, so, I think Uraraka should join Toga and Mei and they should be a team of 3. Yes. Uraraka cried, punching the sky, probably because that meant she definitely progressed to the finals, or maybe because she'd found a couple of new best friends. I mean, yay. And we need Engine Boy, yelled Mei, pointing at Aitsu dramatically. May I ask why? Aitsu frowned. Okay, fine, Midoriya nodded, completely ignoring Aitsu. Then we need to spread our power levels out efficiently amongst all the different groups. So, if you guys could just get into groups of 2 to 4 or 5 and we'll go from there. There was immediately bubbles of excitable chatter as friends separated into groups and pushed each other around to different teams. Aitsu was immediately attacked by the 3 girls who'd essentially kidnapped him. Who's with us then? Shinso asked. Midoriya's expression did not change as he said, I did not think of that. Yaoyorosa spontaneously appeared at his side like some kind of fairy godmother, which Midoriya could totally see her being. If I join the 2 of you to reach the finals, she said, we may find ourselves in a fencing match in front of all these people. Midoriya stared at her. Yes. So, now there were 3 people on his team. Soon enough, when Midoriya looked up and saw Shoto standing amongst Class A and just looking lost, Midoriya smiled, rolled his eyes and waved him over. That made 4. Midoriya didn't need to do much to the teams that were made up afterwards. He did think that Kiken's team, including him, Kirishima, Mina and Suro, was a little strong, but Kiken was so fired up with the idea of defeating Jiro's team, who had this idea where she and light-weighted Tokoyami would sit on top of Shoji, as some kind of impenetrable fortress. Midoriya didn't have the heart to split them up, nor did he have a better idea. Hagakure was also frighteningly excited for the event, and had picked the 2 strong-looking boys, Kota and Sato, to lift her up, and Aoyama to stand at the front to shoot people with lasers, which, to be honest, wasn't a bad idea either. The last team included Kaminari, who'd very dramatically been left out of Kiken's team, and was singing songs about his loneliness as a joke, until he realized that Tsu and Ajiro had already decided that they were teaming with him. What happens if the top few teams don't make up the numbers right? Tsu asked Midoriya. If there are too few or too many? As a joke, which she seemed to take seriously, he replied, the last team plays rock paper scissors. He turned to the others, now assembled in their teams. Okay, so, make sure your team leaders, the ones who are sitting on top, are standing nearer the front so I know what's going on here, okay? Right, so Team Uraraka, your job is to distract the other teams the best you can. You're able to move fast, so keep the other teams off us and take the higher value headbands from them nearer the beginning. You got it? Toga exclaimed, shoving what looked like a jetpack onto Uraraka's back. Team Hagakure, you have our best defense, so you need to be focusing on stopping Class B from taking the headbands, rather than just distracting them. Then Team Jiro, since your earphone jacks and Dark Shadow can easily steal headbands, you need to run around behind the other teams to take as many as possible without them noticing. Looks like we're going to get more points than you, Bakugo, she grinned. Ha, you're right, he retorted. And well, Kaken, could your team just, look, it might be difficult for you, but act as aggressive as possible. A few people stifled their laughter. Hey, he yelled, what's that supposed to mean, huh? Midoriya moved on, finally, Team Kaminari, try and take out as many teams as possible. It's against the rules to knock them over on purpose. So, bear that in mind. Meanwhile, my team will be doing our best to protect the 10 million points. Shoto will be freezing some of Class B's teams in place if we get the chance, so listen with your earpieces in case I need to warn you of anything. If we ever lose the headband, just... Time's up. Present Mike yelled, assemble into your teams, let's get this party started. Just try and get it back to us the best you can. Midoriya shouted as they started to part ways, don't fight each other until my signal near the end. We're going to die immediately, Shinso hissed through gritted teeth. Oh, don't be so pessimistic, Yaoyorozu smiled as they all helped Midoriya clamber on top. Shoto was at the front, with Shinso to Midoriya's left, and Yaoyorozu to his right. Here, this could help. Did you just hand me a knife? Yes. What is wrong with you lot? Midoriya was handed his headband by Miss Midnight, who scowled at the weaponry that Yaoyorozu had made. Midoriya just tied his headband on and drew his sword. Look, I don't want this, Shinso laughed nervously. Pass it back to me then and I might find use for it later, Yaoyorozu offered. How diligent of you. Are you all ready for the battle to begin? Present Mike howled across the stadium. The audience hooped and clapped, clearly ready to see the hero corps take down the villains. Midoriya grinned and readied himself, this was going to be fun. 3, 2, 1, let's go, go, go. Within barely 2 seconds, he felt the need to retract that statement. Class B wasn't going to waste a moment, and from their randomly allocated starting positions around the arena, immediately began by charging at Midoriya's team. Honmuki, now. Monoma called out, leading to his teammate slamming his foot on the ground and sending a ripple across the floor to trap them. Midoriya's team didn't need instruction to dodge, but moments later, Shiozaki, also on Monoma's team, struck, sending her vine hair towards them to engulf Midoriya once again and take the points. I get what the knife was for now. Shinso exclaimed when Midoriya slashed at the vines with his sword. Would you like it back? Yaoyorozu asked. No, I'm good. Midoriya would have struggled a lot more, had the rest of Class A not been there to cause Class B some issues. They had clearly planned to rush them, but Class A swooped in at the last moment to prevent a majority of the teams from getting any closer. Even better, Midoriya had more people on his side, and some of Class B's groups were smaller, two in fact, only had 2 people each, with Rin, firing his scale quirk from the back of Beast Cheese Hida, and Kamakiri wielding his blades from on top of undeniably strong pony. Midoriya. Shoto called out. Not expecting it at all, Midoriya yelled out in surprise when a detached hand swooped in out of nowhere and stole the headband. He lashed out with the sword, but it was too late, Setsuna's hand had already returned to her body and Kendo had secured the 10 million point headband. Yeah. Good job, exclaimed Tetsu, fronting Monoma's team. Bondo, now, called out Monoma. Another team appeared behind Midoriya, and right at the front was Giant Bondo, the one with the glue quirk. Shoto. Midoriya shouted, get ready to. Raccoon Eyes, now. And Kaken's team skidded in front of their opponent. With a nervous cry from Mina, she waved a bare, pink arm to send a veil of acid between them and Bondo. A pop and sizzle, and the acid melted the glue into nothing. Yeah, she yelled triumphantly. Tape arms. Zero, without complaints over the nickname, gritted his teeth and trapped the team in a net of sticky tape, tying them together. Shoto, now. Midoriya finally had the chance to say. On top of the tape, Bondo and his team had now been frozen in place. There was no way they'd be going anywhere, anytime soon. Ignoring present Mick's very biased commentary over the situation, Midoriya growled at Kaken as he took the frozen team's headband for himself, rather than giving it to currently pointless Midoriya. What had happened to Monoma, meanwhile? Well, Toga had. Mei wore one hover boot and Toga had the other. Eureka bore a jetpack, and when she floated their entire team, they could literally fly. Itza had whizzed onto the scene, Toga snatching Monoma's headband to pass it to Eureka, and they took off with a bout of laughter. This left Midoriya the chance to chase after Kendo's team. Don't let him get too close, their class president instructed. We can't have him stealing any of our quirks. Stealing quirks? Shinso pulled a face of utter confusion. Did 18 keep that little detail from you? Grinned Setsuna. You're on the wrong side, man. But he doesn't, you're. Oh my god. I think he gets it, Shoto deadpanned, about to. Don't let him freeze us, yelled Kendo. The girl with the silver hair thrust a hand forwards and Midoriya felt his entire team be pushed backwards by an invisible force. Ah, Yanagi had telekinesis. This team is too strong for this game, Midoriya murmured to his teammates, we need to take them out, and quickly. Still facing Kendo, Midoriya raised his hand to his earpiece, Tsu, I need your team over here. Kendo narrowed her eyes at him, trying to figure out what he was up to. She enlarged both her hands, ready to fight whatever was coming next, which was her biggest mistake. Onto the back of one of those hands, Tsu's long tongue stuck a small, white disc. Kendo had only clocked its existence, only just seen that Tsu's team included Kaminari, before the latter gave her finger guns and a wink, sending a narrowed stream of electricity right at that disc, and electrocuting the entire team. Tsu and the others had already backed off by the time that Shoto was close enough to freeze them again. Midoriya ripped the 10 million point headband, and Kendo's original one, away from the ice, leaving them behind to wallow in defeat. Put the headbands on so that the numbers face backwards, Yayorozu suggested. Midoriya did just that. For the next few minutes, Midoriya and his team focused on the two smaller Class B teams. They were a big problem because of how fast they could move. By the time that they too were netted by Yayorozu and frozen by Shoto, Monoma had finally realized that only his and one other Class B team remained. But that didn't mean Class A was definitely in the clear. Judging from Hagakuru's disappointed cries, Aways, from the other Class B team, had managed to weld the group to the ground and take the headbands they'd collected. The team had then moved on to Jiro's group, and Kurohiro had leapt back into Dark Shadow, so Tokoyama's own quirk was now fighting against them. Kaminari, by this point, had all but shorted himself out, and Eureka's team had just landed, having been out of fuel, and one hover boot had been damaged by Rin with his scales before Midoriya had been able to stop them. Kaken, I need you to take Sen's group out of action. They're the only ones left other than Monoma and they're causing too much of a problem. Midoriya spoke into his earpiece. Take them out yourself, he snarled back. Well, you're picking up stray headbands and we're a little preoccupied. Midoriya snapped, deciding to ignore any angry retorts to better focus on the matter at hand. Monoma's team had come to face them again. I don't know how you managed to convince all the other courses to play along, Monoma hissed. I can't say I'm glad to see Class A's back up to 20 members. Shinso's aiming to transfer to the hero course, Midoriya replied coldly. Don't be so quick to judge. He turned to Shinso, then why are you siding with the villains? Shinso just snarled back, because, wait, what's your name again? Midoriya. Because Midoriya actually offered to help me. What's your excuse? Midoriya tried not to grin. My excuse? Monoma's eyes glazed over. Yes. Midoriya exclaimed. Give us your headbands. Shinso ordered. Unfortunately, the rest of Monoma's team realized something was amiss. Before Monoma could take off their team's stack of points, Shiozaki pinned his arms to his sides with her vines and Tetsu started yelling at them, asking what he'd done. Maybe Shinso could have taken control of him as well, but it wasn't to be. Before Shoto had the chance to try and freeze them, Itza charged onto the scene, Mei and Toga screaming with roller blades on one foot each, and Eureka grasped a handful of Monoma's unprotected headbands as they passed, knocking him harshly on the head by accident in the speed in which they passed them by. Monoma blinked furiously and Midoriya realized the mistake made even before Shinso swore under his breath. With an angry cry, Monoma reached forwards, his hand splitting away from his body and grasping at the only headband he could before Shoto could create an ice wall between them. Kaken came into view in a whirl of smoke and sparks. Itza skidded around to join the fray again, but before anyone could do a thing. Time's up. Present Mike announced the end of the cavalry battle. They all stopped in their tracks as the audience roared. Wide-eyed, Midoriya dismounted from his team, heart thumping against his rib cage as he took off the headband to see. 10 million points. We won, he gaped. We won. In first place, it's Team Midoriya. Present Mike yelled as they celebrated. Class A's president sure knows how to straight guys, because second place is Team Bakugo, closely followed by Team Eureka. The audience clearly had mixed feelings, but Class A was over the moon. Everyone who was still free to actually move was cheering and clapping, knowing that everyone they desperately needed had made it through to the finals. Now all they needed was. But all hope is not lost. For Team Monoma squeezes into fourth place. Anything but that. Midoriya's face fell as he realized that last headband had been just enough for Monoma's team to pull ahead of Tsu's. Ignoring the rest of the commentary, Midoriya glowered at Monoma as he appeared at the edge of the ice wall that Shoto had made, leaning against it and grinning. All hope is not lost, he repeated. We'll just see about that, said Midoriya. We'll see. How long do we have? I don't know, but let's assume not much. Toga slid her laptop across the table in the waiting room. Midoriya was expecting just a phone, but this was way better. He was already well into his project, but it had been quite a while since he'd been able to practice such a feat, and if he was caught, he may just find himself, and the ex-member of Class 1A, in a world of trouble. Immediately after the cavalry battle, and they were released for their second break, Midoriya said he'd be talking with Toga about some of the support items he'd be using in the tournament round. Whilst Mei was distracted, chatting with Eureka, the rest just said they'd see him later, not thinking anything else of it. In reality, what was hidden in Toga's case of extra support items, was her laptop, and Midoriya had just broken through the firewall. After the second round, when the finalists were determined, someone had to input the names into a system which would randomly allocated battles in this year's tournament. However, Midoriya knew full well that there was a way to make the allocations a lot less random. He'd watched plenty of sports festivals before, and far too many times had perfect opponents been selected for a good show. Such as, someone from Class A who had been facing off against a particular hero course student for the rest of the competition, and somehow ended up fighting them in the final of the tournament round, since all their previous opponents had been a bad matchup. Of course, the battles were a little rigged, they needed the drama. This was a televised show, after all. All that meant one thing: if there was a way to manually alter who fights who, then there was something to hack into, and a way to change that. 5 minutes later, and Midoriya found himself sitting before a copy of the tournament bracket. He clapped his hands together and Toga gave him a little cheer. Oh, we can't have that, he grinned, dragging Honuki's name away from his own. No, you can fight. Eureka. Sky versus Earth, let's see how that turns out, huh? And if you beat her, you can fight Kaken, who can burn Shiozaka to a crisp. Oh. Put me against Mei. Toga exclaimed, pointing at the screen. Sounds like a plan, Midoriya laughed, and swapped her away from Itza to do just that. Okay, no, I don't want to face Shinso. I'll face Monoma, let's see if he actually took my advice and learned how to fight quirkless. Toga giggled manically before slurping from a juice box loudly. It was blood orange. Okay, and I want to fight Yayorozu after that, if she can beat Mina. I'll leave that one as it is. If I win that. No, Shoto will murder me, I fancy my chances with. Who will get that far? Probably Itza, that sounds at least the slightest bit. His screen went blank. Midoriya pursed his lips, hands hovering above the keyboard. Did it run out of charge? Asked Toga. Nope, I think I was just found out. Let's get out of here, Midoriya said hurriedly, shutting the laptop down and ushering Toga out the door. Did you fix what you needed to fix? Yayorozu asked curiously when the two of them walked back into Class A's waiting room, where they'd all gathered. Toga disappeared soon after with Mei in tow, and Shinso was nowhere to be seen. Midoriya laughed nervously. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. A few exchanged glances unsurely as he sat down. So, what's the plan? Midoriya blinked at Shoto. What's the plan? Shoto repeated. What next? We wait to find out who's fighting who. Itza stepped forwards. There are 4 members of Class B left in the competition. What do you know about them? Midoriya wavered. Oh, right. So, there's Monoma, we all know him well. From what I've gathered, he can copy 3 quirks at a time, and have them available to him for the next 5 minutes. He has to turn off one quirk to activate another. So, bear in mind that he will choose the 3 most effective powers against you from his classmates. If he touches your skin, he gains your power, and loses the ability he copied first. You'll always know your quirk better than Monoma does. It may be better trying to force him to give up one of the powers he's copied in exchange for yours. We want him to be against you then, right? Tsu asked. She was no longer in the competition and Midoriya felt kind of bad for it. Yeah, and I have a feeling he's not particularly good at fighting without powers. Anyway, the next person who got through is Shiozaki, the girl with the vines who did that introductory speech. A few people sniggered as they recalled that. She's a huge problem, Midoriya explained. She was first in the hero course entrance exam and has amazing control over her quirk. But her vines are weak against fire or brute strength. We just have to hope for a good matchup. Then there's Tetsu, he has a steel quirk that's weirdly similar to Kirishima's. In fact, it's kind of exactly the same. Except that the metal has some different strengths and weaknesses. Fire could prove to be a huge problem to him, I doubt he does well in intense heat for too long. Finally, Honmuki. He's the only member of Class B who knows I'm actually quirkless, although I doubt that's going to last much longer. He's a recommended student, meaning a pro hero recommended him to be in the school and he took a different entrance exam. He's easily as strong as Shiozaki. He can make anything softer, so turn the entire pitch into a mass of quicksand. Most support items won't work against him and if the match goes on for longer than a few seconds you might be in trouble. Knock him out of bounds as soon as you can or find a way to stay off the floor. Bear in mind Monoma might copy his quirk. Kirishima grimaced, they all sound like really tough opponents, how are we going to best them? Luck of the draw, Midoriya admitted. It really was luck, he had no idea if his plan to rig who was fighting who had even worked. But we have some really strong people here too. Class B is probably talking it all through right now, thinking the same thing as us. Also, we outnumber them. Mei and Toga agreed to forfeit after using their match to advertise their support items, so we don't have to worry about them, and it doesn't matter if Shinso wins, because our deal will still go ahead. Midoriya stood up, adjusting the retractable shield that was now attached to his arm. Other than that, we're fighting each other. It doesn't matter who wins, as long as it's not Class B. But what about you? Asked Shoto. Me. You have to be on the podium, remember. Kaken stood up too, no one's forfeiting any of their matches against freaking Deku. What? Kirishima frowned, but he has to make it to the podium, man. If he can't hold his own then he doesn't freaking deserve the chance it'll give him. Midoriya hated how much he was right, it's okay, and Kaken's right. We'll just have to see what happens, but it would be unfair if you just gave up. A voice rang out through the speakers, calling them all back to the stadium. Good luck, guys. Hagakure exclaimed, we'll be cheering you on, ignore the rest of the crowd. They parted ways in the corridor, the rest of Class A waving them goodbye and shouting encouraging words as they disappeared up to the stands. Midoriya and Itza led the remainder out into the stadium once more. Nervous? He asked Midoriya. A little, he admitted. That was all they said. The 9 members of Class A walked out through an entrance opposite to the other 7. It was definitely done on purpose. Shinso, Mei, and Toga entered behind the hero course, as though to show that they were on the good side, and Class B wasn't nearly as outnumbered as they might have seemed to be. They lined up on a raised stage in the middle of the arena. It was made of concrete, and Midoriya could already tell that this was going to be painful to fall onto. A large, white border line indicated where they were forbidden to go past, and whilst midnight reminded them of the rules, Midoriya scanned the crowd. He'd been so focused on the previous 2 events, that he had yet to appreciate the sheer volume of people, so many eyes, focused on them. On him, the gold-banded class president of 1A. And more than that, the cameras were the tunnels for eyes all over the country, if not the world. He knew his mother was one of them. He wondered what she thought of him now. Without further ado, Midnight finally exclaimed, "Let's reveal our tournament bracket." She waved her whip, and the screens across the stadium lit up. Midoriya's plan had worked. He couldn't suppress the grin that spread across his face when he saw that nearly all of his changes had been successful. Did Nizu know? Oh well, he clearly hadn't made an effort to reverse the damage dealt. The first match will go ahead in 5 minutes. Midnight proclaimed. Competitors may prepare a strategy and ready themselves. Good luck. A timer appeared just below the tournament bracket, and they filed back off the stage. Once they were out of sight, Class A erupted into cheers. "Oh, my God!" Mina yelled. She then squealed loudly, jumping up and down. "I'm against Momo, so I'm losing immediately, but oh my God. This is the best thing that could have happened," Yayorozu gaped. "Hey. All our strengths are matching up to their weaknesses," she realized, ignoring Mina. "Oh, what a wonderful coincidence," Midoriya smiled, clapping his hands together. They all stared at him. He grinned a little wider. "So, I'm going to go stalk Monoma to see what quirks he's borrowing, have fun thinking up strategies." And he turned on his heel, waving goodbye over his shoulder before any of them could question what he had just done. The game was on. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.